while we have everyone joining, if you wouldn't mind typing your name and who you and where you're calling in from in the chat, and maybe a little bit about what you're excited to get from this conversation. We love to kind of customize things. And here's Ted. Perfect.
Hey.
There he is.
Great.
Yeah, we cracked the code.
Yes, there we go. Oh, Ted, we were just having everyone chime in the chat saying hello, where they're calling in from. I'll get that ball rolling.
Yeah. And part of this conversation, I mean, we want to make this conversational and interactive as possible.
Exactly.
I'll ask you a couple of questions. We'll get the ball rolling and see where it goes from there. But excited to have the conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks for all you guys are doing. It's terrific.
Thank you, Ted.
And same to you, Ted. You're
Likewise.
doing some really amazing work we're excited to dig into here. Just a couple more quick housekeeping things while we have everyone still joining. My name is Nick Hool, as you can see on my Zoom profile there. I'll be running point for the Q&A section that we'll have about halfway through the conversation, depending on where Gary and Ted take the convo. And so you can put any questions, comments, concerns, whatever that is, in the chat or the Q&A function, and I'll read those out to the panelists and the rest of the audience as well. We are recording this, as you should have heard when you joined, and we'll share that recording out with everyone who's here today, as well as anyone who registered. And you can feel free to share that recording with anyone you'd like to. Hi, Steve. Great to have you with us. Lee and more people than I can count now are chiming in, so this is great. Joanne from Cape Town. Hey, great.
Yeah, we also got some William and Mary alum here too, Ted.
Yes, exactly.
Thought you might get a kick out of that.
Yep. Graham, good to see you with us. Graham is running the Entrepreneurship Center at William and Mary, so doing some really cool work there.
Nice.
And so where's Sylvia from here, Nick? I'm going to butcher this. Mpulanga?
Yeah, I'm not familiar, but great to have you, Sylvia.
Yeah, it's great. It's great that we've got such a diverse audience across the globe. So
yeah.
I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in here.
Yeah, please do. I'll shut my camera down, and I'll when you see me pop back up, whack-a-mole style, that means we're ready to engage the rest of the audience.
All right, and we'll try to limit this to an hour. So
yeah.
Thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm super excited to have this conversation. It's been a long time. I want to give you a little bit of background for those of you who might not know who Ted is. I think he's one of our nation's leading advocates for innovation and entrepreneurship in education. In 2012, Ted was appointed by President Obama to represent the U.S. at the United Nations General Assembly, where he focused on education and youth entrepreneurship. Ted is a graduate of William and Mary College with high honors in English and physics, also has a PhD in engineering from Stanford, where he also taught. He's got a pretty amazing background. He's worked with Sir Ken Robinson to create the innovation playlist, and we'll put links to all of his work in the chat here. Ted has produced the movie Most Likely to Succeed, which won all kinds of awards. It's been in thousands of schools. I screened it myself, and I was on the board of a Montessori school here in Ohio. Ted is also the author of What School Could Be, which is the title of this webinar. Ted, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
So Ted, I want to just kind of start. I think we met at South by Southwest when you and Dr. Tony Wagner were debuting Most Likely to Succeed. And I absolutely love that film. I loved Tony's work. What really got my attention is I heard you speak at University School here in Cleveland, and you opened your talk. It really got my attention. You opened your talk. You were talking about your background in investing in technology. That's kind of your bailiwick. But a conversation you were having something with someone about a new technology that was going to disrupt jobs. And how is that the conversation that got you on this?
Well, there were really two things that intersected that got me on this. I mean, one is I did have a great vantage point to see how fast machine intelligence in a wide range of forms is advancing. And so that's robotics that's really affecting, manual labor type jobs, physical jobs, artificial intelligence that are cognitive job related. Anyway, one of the things that a phrase I love to use is, if it's routine, it will be done by a machine. And that is a relentless, unending trend. And if anything, the pandemic has accelerated. My friends in the tech sector say that they've seen 10 years of digitization of the economy happen in 2 years.
Wow.
So that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's a thing, but it's a profound thing. And the second element that sort of collided there was looking at what metrics we use to evaluate students, teachers, schools, districts, nations, and what skills lie under, behind those accountability frameworks. And so when you start to look at this, which I did, I sort of had this epiphany actually when my own kids were in middle school, where I said, oh my gosh, the way they can do really well in school is if they can memorize material, replicate low-level procedures, and follow instructions, they're going to do incredibly well. And I've asked that question now of hundreds of schools. If I put a kid in your school tomorrow morning who excelled at those 3 narrow, increasingly irrelevant skills, how would they do? And the answer is invariably they would be on the honor roll. And so if that's what we promote, the exact bundle of skills that machine intelligence does instantly, flawlessly, perfectly, what does that do for the prospects of our kids? And I think the complement of that is when you push really hard on that, in parallel, you are, and you see it as kids go from toddlers to high school kids to college students, you're diminishing their creativity, their curiosity, their audacity, their joy of learning. And so it's like, whoa, wait a minute, we're pushing in the wrong direction. So that sort of got me going on this 11 years ago. It had changed my life, and it's been all consuming for me.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you grabbed a hold of that with just great passion. And, you reminded me of something, Ted. I remember in Friedman's book, Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late, like Astroteller's graph. I don't know if you remember that. The idea that the rate of technology, the technological advancement is accelerating, and it's a curve.
Yeah.
The human ability to adapt is a gradual uphill slope. And so how do you bridge that gap? And I think that's what you're kind of onto. That's what innovation and entrepreneurship is all about. I think the entrepreneurial mindset better enables an individual to be more adaptive. I would say an entrepreneurial mindset is an adaptive mindset.
Yeah, no, exactly. And on that exponential growth, because that's quite telling, is that at any point in time, if you look at it locally, it looks like it's fairly linear. But if you step back and look at it, it is exponential growth, and it has been for 45, 50 years. And so when you look at some of these trends, I often ask this question of audiences. I love the question because it gets at a couple of things. But if machine intelligence, the price performance of silicon chips, if that's doubling every 2 years, where is it in 10 years? And where is it in 20 years? I'll ask that question. I'd say out of combined audiences of 50,000, 2 people have gotten it right. And it gets to the fact that it's hard for us to estimate it. It's in 2 years, it's 2x, 4 years, 4x, 6 years, 8x, 8 years, 16x, 10 years, 32x, 20 years, not 64x, but over 1,000x, 1,024x. We all study exponential functions in school, but people can't do that calculation. I think that sort of makes an interesting point about the math we study. But also, when you start to think of these things being 1,000-fold as powerful by the time our kindergarten kids are early in their careers, that strikes me as having profound ramifications for how we think about preparing kids for that world.
Yeah, I think a lot about mindset stuff, Ted, and it seems to me, and you kind of just alluded to this in one of your comments, but I think part of what's preventing us from adapting is that schools were conceived of in the midst of the Industrial Revolution, and this sort of a managerial mindset emerged that was focused on replication, efficiency, linearity, the division of labor, and so forth, which is important. I mean, you can't; that's still a necessary thing. But I think these managerial paradigms are just not conducive to innovation skills, to the entrepreneurial skills. And that's where we get stuck. The nature of a mindset is such that it becomes so deeply embedded in our individual and collective conscience, we can't really see how it's impeding us.
Yeah. And when you interview employers, I want to be clear, the purpose of education is not strictly preparing kids for career, but I also observed that if you spent 16 years in school and you don't have any hireable proficiencies and you have mindsets that are antithetical to what professional organizations are looking for, that's not a good thing. And so you ask people in the workplace, who are the people you want to hire? Who are the people that make great employees? They're the people that ask great questions, that are heat-seeking missiles in terms of identifying opportunities to plug a problem or create a new opportunity for the business. And they'll say, particularly, I think, with the academic superstars, believe it or not, but they'll say, the phrase I hear a lot is the go fetch a dog biscuit kids. Like, I'm motivated, I'm smart, I jump through hoops really well. Tell me what I need to do. And be really clear with what I need to do. And I'll check back with you in an hour and tell you what I did. And then tell me the next thing to do, which is basically what we do to kids in 16 years of school.
Yeah.
But that's not what works in the workplace. And I think, and this is a good time to sort of amplify on this point, I think it's really important to be clear about what we mean by entrepreneurial. And, I spent my career in venture capital. So is somebody who starts a company that goes on to be a gigantic publicly traded company entrepreneurial? Yes. But I think we do ourselves a disservice if we think of entrepreneurial as being somebody who creates a business that scales. It's
100%.
Much broader than that. And
you
can be a philosophy professor and be entrepreneurial. You can be starting it's really visualizing a world that's different and better from the world you're living in today. And then leveraging your own motivation, ability to learn how to learn, and drawing on resources around you to create something that affects positive change. That to me is an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Ted. I'm so happy you said that. And this took me 25 years to figure it out, but I've never been satisfied with the typical definitions of an entrepreneur, like someone who takes a risk in exchange for a profit. I don't know, Ted. I think that's grossly misleading. The entrepreneurs I interviewed, the vast majority of them, there's a huge purpose component to their work. They're not just profit driven.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
some, a few are, so that fair
sure
enough. But I think out of that Venn diagram of the people who attack life entrepreneurially, who get up every morning with a sense of purpose, who are thinking boldly about how they can affect positive change, most of them are in pursuits that aren't related to startup business. I mean, that is sort of what we hope to see in every adult. And I think it's what gives people joy and purpose in their life.
100%.
Making a difference on something important.
Yeah, I'm starting to see a scholarship around that, around the eudaimonic benefits of entrepreneurial activity, like that's starting to emerge, and it's very interesting to me. And I don't know if I ever told you this before, Ted. I spent the last decade traveling around the world interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs, but not the big name entrepreneurs. I'm more interested in the mindset and the methods of a typical entrepreneur. And what's really interesting, so my point for saying this to you, Ted, is I don't think of it as a business discipline. This is back to your point. I think of it as a behavioral phenomenon.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at it from this perspective of, as humans, we're sort of growth-oriented, opportunity-seeking organisms. And at the same time, we're stability-seeking, uncertainty-avoiding organisms.
Yeah.
And so often we default to the stability-seeking, uncertainty avoidance, right? But the opportunity-seeking, exploratory side of us is innate, but it can be easily thwarted.
Yeah. And where you'll see, I love the fact you interviewed, entrepreneurs of all stripes, but particularly the ones that are just, not out to start some great big, massive company. But one of the things that I think we can all draw encouragement, optimism from is where do we see enormous degrees of entrepreneurial mindsets? Go to a preschool, go to a kindergarten. Right. This is not a mindset we have to somehow imbue on top of people in the court. We just have to stop crushing it out of kids, because young kids, they don't fear ambiguity. They'll try a million things, and if it doesn't work, they'll just keep trying. They'll just keep trying. They'll just keep trying. They take joy when they've actually created something. They see it in front of them, and it's right there. but what I find is the wake-up call, and I'll go after a particular sector, but we could broaden it, is I'll interview oftentimes a lot of recent graduates of top colleges. And I'll ask them this question. I'll say, if there were not one single job available to apply for, what's a path you could create for yourself that would give you joy and fulfillment and that would make your world better? What's a path you could create? They will look at me like, well, wait a minute. You mean that's an option? Like, nobody told me. It's like it wasn't on the, be a doctor, a lawyer, whatever. And it wasn't on our list of,
it wasn't on the menu.
Yeah, it wasn't on the menu. I could actually create something. And getting back to that advancing power of machine intelligence, another point of optimism is that if you put people against machines on almost any defined task, if machines aren't better than people today, they will be. They will be.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
But if you combine a really, motivated person who can draw on machine intelligence, that runs circles around anything on its own. You can take a pretty good chess player with great AI chess playing software. It will beat the best AI routine. It will beat Gary Kasparov. It'll beat anything. And it's like, ooh, isn't that interesting? Should we be equipping kids to draw on resources to create more interesting things in time-effective and bold ways? I think the answer is unequivocally yes. But what is that in most schools? That's called cheating and is grounds for expulsion.
Right. You're going to, yeah. Part of what I've come away with, Ted, in my work and my research is that non-entrepreneurial behavior is learned. And that's sort of what you're saying. You go into third grade or first or second grade, and it's all over the place. And we learn not to be that way. But also, it took me 25 years to do this, but I now define entrepreneurship as the self-directed pursuit of opportunity to create value for others. And the act of creating value for others empowers the self, not just economically, but in a more holistic way in terms of and I came across this writings of Karl Marx. Like, where would you go looking for entrepreneurship insights at Karl Marx? But he said that the desire to fulfill human needs through our own effort is part of what makes us human. And so I think what's happening, Ted, I think is that when a human being is able to find that intersection of their natural interests and abilities and the needs of other humans, they become optimally engaged. But we're making this fundamental attribution error. We're thinking, oh, Ted's just a passionate guy.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's something in you. We're attributing it to who you are, and we're ignoring the extent to which these other factors are contributing.
No, absolutely. And you nail it with your definition. I'm going to steal that and pay you licensing fees for it.
Oh, please, help me spread that. I mean, that because what I like about that, Ted, is like we're sort of like wresting it from the cold, dead hands of the business school.
Yeah.
Right. It's like anyone can embrace that. It's situation independent. It's IQ independent. It's resource independent. And back to the question that you said a minute ago, it's kind of like about asking the students stuff, like you didn't have a job to go, like I like to ask people this question, like, look, first principles, we all live by exchanging useful things with one another.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to change for the foreseeable future. But the questions that are changing are like, what is the useful thing that you're exchanging? With whom are you exchanging it? And what is the mechanism by which you learn how to become useful to other humans?
Yeah.
What's preventing you? And I think those are the mindset questions that sort of tease out, as you said in your question to the young students, like, so sort of get at, like, what are the underlying assumptions that are antiquated?
Yeah.
That might be holding you back. One of the things I there's so much I want to dig into here, Ted. But talk to me about what did you do? Like, so you had this epiphany, like schools not preparing kids, schools going in absolutely the wrong direction. You have this epiphany. Then what?
Well, it was energizing to say the least. And I think it's worth explaining this in terms of the approach I take. I am a venture capitalist by background. I am not even remotely a corporate CEO. And if you look, a lot of the business types who get involved with education, they have been or still are corporate CEOs. So what's a corporate CEO? What's their life like? Their life is like, this is what we're going to do, pushing it down the chain, say, this is what you got to do, holding people accountable to that. And it's basically a command and control model. That's really not at all the world of somebody in the world of venture capital, because what do? We work with people, what is your dream? What do you want to accomplish? And how can I support you? How can I help you? What can I do to help you move forward in a way that you're really driven to do? Not, here's what you have to do because I say so. Yeah. And we do a lot in education, from business people to secretaries of education at the state or national level to legislators, blah, blah, on college admissions, whatever. There are a lot of people weighing on education saying, here's what we want you to do. Oftentimes not terribly well thought out, but this is what we're insisting or requesting or telling you've got to do. And for me, it was more like, well, let's think about how we can create cultures of innovation that draw on and bring out the best in our students and our educators. And as I thought about a strategy, starting from square zero, right? I mean, right. I really, it wasn't like I had a long track record or anything. I felt like,
but that's also helpful. I just want to interject there for a second, Ted. Changes almost always come from people who are outside the system. I mean, it's an important point. I just wanted to inject the fact that you weren't steeped in education.
Yeah. So I decided to start with a film, and we did this film, Most Likely to Succeed. And I really didn't know anything about film and was interested in education, but to be honest, didn't know that much. And so I did a long search to find a great director. And if you see the film, and I hope everybody sees, we just did a back-to-back watch party last night. We premiered several years ago, January 25th at Sundance. And so to celebrate that, we had watch parties online. And, people, I saw it twice last night. And I've seen this film a lot.
Right.
It's wonderful. And give the credit to the director. He did Last Chance U and Cheer on Netflix. He's won multiple Emmys. I supported him and his team for 2 years to film it. But we weren't, this is important to go into. I felt, and then he came through for me, that if we could deliver a vision, if you could actually put people in the shoes of the students and teachers in a very different learning environment, where kids are working collaboratively on bold cross-disciplinary projects, and they're having to make things work with their hands while they're tying it to the academic theory behind it, and teachers are trusted to teach to their expertise and passion, that vision, if we could do that in a really powerful way and reach people emotionally, that is way better than an op-ed or a policy manual or all this other stuff that people tend to ignore. The other thing that, and I give the director enormous credit for it, we intentionally did not say, this is a great school, or don't you wish you were this school, or everything you're doing now is bad. Instead, it's really like, well, here's something interesting. Follow us on this journey for 90 minutes and see what you think. And the narrator, Greg, says, it's too early. We can't prove anything with data. Here's some interesting things. They actually do really well in standardized test scores, even though they don't teach the test. This is also interesting. They're basically all getting into first choice colleges, even though they're not college admissions obsessed. But, makes people nervous. We show some parents that are really nervous about it.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I'll tell you what, my favorites, and it's all fresh in my mind, my favorite scene in the film is we did some filming at 12 different schools, and we really zeroed in on 2 students and their teachers, but we did some filming at a school, high-powered suburban school outside of Denver. There's this scene where the principal and the head of the math department ask a bunch of the students, they say, well, I'm just curious. I mean, are you here to learn math that will help you be more productive in your daily lives? are you just here to get good grades? And the students all like, they're dumbstruck. They're like, why would any adult think we're actually in school to learn? Of course, we're not here to learn. We're just here to ace. They one after another says, all we care about is our grades. We are here to ace the test.
They didn't even think there was anything wrong with that answer.
No, they just thought this is like, this should be patently obvious to everyone. Nobody comes to school to learn. Nobody comes to school to derive joy from pursuing something they're interested in. Nobody comes to create an initiative that can make the world better. We're just here to increase our chances of getting into a slightly more selective college. That's the game.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, wonderful.
Well, it's one of the things that I've observed in interviewing entrepreneurs, Ted, and maybe you could speak to this, is the banality of the individual.
Sorry to interrupt. Who, by the way, have almost always dropped out of school.
Right. Well, there's that, right? It's like a 2.2 average or something.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
A fairly mediocre student. But I there's an aspect of this that's really fascinating to me in entrepreneurship. And I think you can't even measure it in the same way we measure intelligence traditionally. And I've studied a little bit about implicit learning, and apparently our brains are much more robust. Our ability to learn implicitly is far more robust than our ability to learn through a more traditional transfer of knowledge. No. And I remember being struck in these interviews by the banality of the individual sometimes, not always. But I'm interviewing an entrepreneur that's done something, they're not bazillionaires. They haven't created any game-changing technology, but I'm not detecting any particular brilliance or charisma or creativity. They're just average people. And I've just sort of come to think about this. It's not really, there's not a hereditary component to it. It's not really tied to IQ. And you've alluded to this. It's tapping into what's in the person.
Yeah.
That's
and they just, and I think that's our opportunity in school is I find this so interesting. I'll often ask audiences, smaller, sometimes quite large, of adults, what experiences during the time you were in school, during your school years, what experiences in a positive way made you the person you are? And it's almost never, that course on X. It wasn't, when I was balancing chemical equations or factoring polynomials or memorizing the definition of a iambic pentameter or whatever, on and on. But so often they'll say, when one of my teachers, it often was like a short conversation, but one of my teachers approached me and said, here's what I've observed in you. And that is an enormously great gift and power you have. I think you are going to do important things in your life with that. That sense of conviction that somebody besides a parent who, the kids will discount whatever their parent says to them. But if an adult takes an interest and is specific in saying, this is what I see, and I think this is going to serve you so well in life as you move forward, that conviction that I can make a difference, that carries kids so far and stands out. I mean, when people look back, they say, that's what made the difference. I think that's the power of people in education, is they have that opportunity to change lives. And many of them do that day in and day out, for which I'm quite grateful. But I think there really is that inner sense, versus, right, a universe where time and time again, you're getting false negatives. I got bad scores. I'm not doing well and stuff. I don't really care about it. The test, can I memorize stuff and get it back quickly in a time pressure setting?
Yeah.
But I'm hearing again and again. One of my comments in my book was a really great woman in New Hampshire who said, worked with kids in the most challenging circumstances. She said, here's the one SAT word they all know: proficient, because they are told again and again that they are not proficient based on their test scores. And those kids have enormous potential. And as you said, when you start to look at the creative and differentiated ways people pursue entrepreneurial lives, it's a wide mosaic of talents and gifts and determination that lets somebody make a positive contribution. But we sort of cram them into this narrow channel called school, where we measure them on test questions. And honestly, and I think this is a fair criticism, I think if we bulldozed away the SATs and the ACT and all the high stakes tests that states shove down the throats of our schools, particularly the higher grades, and we replaced it with time performance on crossword puzzles and Sudoku, that would be every bit as predictive and revealing, right? Except we wouldn't take it so seriously.
Right.
Like, nobody thinks you're a dummy because you're not fast at doing a crossword puzzle with the clock ticking.
Right.
It's just like, but those are the same skills it gets at. And,
Yeah.
and it's just so much squandered potential that I think is unleashed when you start to give kids the opportunity. What's something you would like to do? Create, produce, make, stay at until you've done something you're proud of, make a difference in your world. Even if that's some part of school, it's transformational.
I stole this line from Jaime Casap, like, stop asking kids what they want to be.
Yeah.
And ask them what problems they want to solve and what do they need to learn in order to solve the problems, and watch the level of engagement change. Like, but Ted, the one thing I wanted to make sure I said to you on this podcast is what I love about your work is it's so infused with optimism. Like and what school could be, you were finding teachers, a lot of the case studies you have in that book, like teachers that are doing great things in spite of the system. Can you talk about maybe an example of that? Like where they're not necessarily, it's not part of a broader mandate or something. They're just off in the corner, figuring out how to engage their students.
So I want to answer that. And I just noticed somebody had a great question, so I can actually integrate the question into this response. Is in my book, I went to all 50 states. I visited a couple hundred schools, and I came up with the idea of writing a book around showcasing an example, generally one example per state, that kind of blew me away. The students were engaged. They could speak very knowledgeably about what they were studying, learning, and why it was important to them, where teachers had a bounce in their step. And it's a whole range. I mean, I purposely wanted it to be not X, but a wide tapestry of great things. What was so interesting, right, is that when I interviewed the teachers and said, where did this, you're doing this that seems so cool, and your kids are clearly loving it, where'd the idea come from? It was never an email I got from central office or my state commissioner of education or my, it was always their idea, really important. And they had the back of somebody senior in their school, generally their principal. So they said, I wanted to do it. I was itching to do this. My principal said, give it a try. I've got your back. If people complain or you run into a hiccup, which when you try something new, you always run into hiccups.
Sure.
I will make sure you're supported. And it was just like, whoa, you just realize so many of our educators want to do this, and if we just supported them, created cultures that give them kind of the go ahead, give it a shot, all sorts of things are possible. And it's the question about how do you do that in the case of structured classrooms. I think there are two important points. One is, I'm a big believer, and you see it in the work on what school could be, of design thinking mindsets. Like if you decide you're going to change a school by saying we're going to do everything different tomorrow morning and everybody's got to do it, that is a really direct path to getting fired and having everybody upset. That's not how things change when they're built-in patterns of behavior and expectations. We really advocate for what are some small confidence building steps you can take in the context of their normal flow that get students to take more of a leadership role in their learning, that give them the space and support to create something to make their community better. And if that's 10, 15, 20% of their time, we get excited. Would I like it to be all of their time? I certainly wanted it to be all of the time for my kids. But even some, the phrase I use is, in the desert, it doesn't take a lot of rain to make the flowers bloom. And I think that's the opportunity, is to just say, we're going to give you some time. And one of the questions I get frequently from people in schools or districts is they say, if I could just do one thing, what would I do? And in the film, we show these kids all geared up toward a public exhibition of displays of creative, great student, projects that they've created and carried forward. And just say, here we are, we're sitting there into January. Just say, by the way, on May 19th, I'm inviting all of the parents and all sorts of people from our community to come in, and we're going to give students a chance to display great work they created in the next 4 months. And let's make sure these kids aren't holding a bag with nothing to present. Like suddenly all sorts of things. Oh, May 19th. Oh, we better sure as heck give our kids some space to create something. And these kids will rise to the occasion. Like it's like they're so desperate to say, how often, kids in high school, kids in college, how often do you say, what's something you want to learn? And we're going to support the bejesus out of you so you can learn it and become a relative expert on it to a high standard.
Well, I ask this question a lot, Ted. Like, think about this for a minute. What happens if you could just this is a thought experiment. You have two identical people. Like, one of them is immersed in a situation where learning and work become rote, become drudgery, and the other person, learning and work becomes a source of meaning and purpose and joy, discovery. Like, over some period of time, this is an enormous impact on someone's life. And I just, again, I think we make this fundamental attribution error. We attribute, we overestimate the importance of traits, and we ignore the extent to which the situation is acting upon the individual. And I think that's really kind of what you're getting at. I want to say one thing before. I know Nick's popped up saying, like, hey guys, there's lots of comments in here. So, but I just came across this work of Jerome Brunner. Are you familiar with him, like the discovery learning guy? So he kind of, I'll send you the paper after we're off the call. But I'm enamored of this idea. Like, so I created this term, Ted. I wanted to run this up the flagpole with you, like entrepreneurial discovery learning. So it's not just discovery learning, but it's like you're trying to figure out how to make yourself useful to other humans, like outside of a known system.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, like, you don't have to bulldoze the building. You don't have to fire all the teachers and destroy everything. I think you just have to introduce some discovery learning so they can develop discovery skills.
Yeah.
Like the attitudes and skills required to discover useful things are distinct from the attitudes and skills required to exploit useful things. And we need both.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one of the positives, right, is that, one of the challenges, right, is that schools are not, in many cases, all that welcoming of deviations from the norm. That's my goal. Like, what I try to do is, and I would urge people here to check out what schoolcouldbe.org, because we've got a whole curated set of resources, great video, and I take an enormous amount of pride in the quality of the video work we do. And it's on this community platform. It's like, I call it Facebook without the ads or scuzziness. And so we would let, if you're in a school, you can invite colleagues and you can look at things and co-innovate. And we are always anxious to hear back from people about what they're working. I borrow a phrase from my buddy, Tony Wagner, innovation's a team sport. So, that's, I think, encouraging. But as I say, it's very, schools can be a bit challenging to inject in them a sense of, we really should be thinking differently. So we try to give them the sort of the wherewithal to convince a broader community that, we should be doing some innovating, but also it can happen in so many different places, and it can happen in traditional classrooms. I mean, you can teach, I'll give you one example to make the point. Most kids, and this is tragic, when they are in the middle of or have just taken a history class, I'll ask them, what did you learn in history? And the answer is often, I learned I never want to take another history class. Like, what could be more crushing, right? In the film, we call that AP US History, and I'm not a fan of AP, and we could get into that. But I mean, AP US History goes from 1491 to the present day, with 2 days on the Civil War and 2 days on World War II and 20 minutes on I mean, it's just a sprint through history trivia. And then you go to the bookstore and buy AP US History flashcards, and we call that history. And then 2/3 of adults can't name the 3 branches of government, including elected US senators. So are we really succeeding with that model? No. Are we ranking and sorting kids based on their motivation and ability to do short-term memorization? Yes. Does that have anything to do with being passionate and understanding of history? No. Okay. So one of my examples is in Fargo, North Dakota. So it's 8th grade kids. Okay. beginning of the year in a history class, kids sort of say, we're not interested. We don't want to do this. The educators say, okay, well, what do you want to do? And here's how it went. One of the kids says, there are really cool buildings in downtown Fargo. How about if we understand the history of these interesting buildings, these iconic buildings? They said, well, that's interesting. How would you go about that? And another kid says, well, we don't want to write essays with footnotes. Nobody reads those kinds of essays. Another kid says, why don't we make documentaries about each building? Kids say, yeah, that would be great. We'll interview older people in the community. We'll go to the library. We'll compile these documentaries. Another kid says, well, why don't we put signs on the buildings? I'm a woodworking kid. I could design great signs. And this classmate loves calligraphy. So we could just have beautiful signs. And the kid that's got some tech skills says, well, why don't we put QR codes on each of the signs so you can link to the documentary? And another kid says, well, why don't we put all the documentaries on a website? And then they say, let's have a public exhibition in downtown Fargo when we've done this and invite the town council and the mayor and parents and business people and everything else. And it's like, whoa, and what I find so interesting about that is those kids are absolutely getting reinforcement on entrepreneurial mindsets.
100%.
Those kids are learning how to think like historians. But the final point, and this is sort of defining my next sort of set of priorities is, and I didn't realize it at the time when I met with them, but those kids are getting good at something the adult world values. Those kids, after an 8th grade experience, can answer a question that many college graduates can't answer, which is, are you good at something today that the adult world values? Because if you can create a website that's good, you can market your services entrepreneurially. If you can create great videos, you can market your services entrepreneurially. If you can develop a social media campaign to raise awareness, boy, are there ever adult organizations desperate for that skill. And it's to me, a very energizing prospect to think of kids in middle and high school in the context of a history class, or think about being the digital media team behind a school play or a sports team, where you're doing just what I said, but also maybe doing podcasts or doing, who knows, a whole range of these things that these kids can get really great at. And we've been doing some micro pilots. Again, I do a lot in North Dakota. And we said to the kids, with no support, no handholding, I've taken that a little bit further, but anyway, our basic challenge was identify a nonprofit in your community you admire and do something digitally to help them. And then tell us in the nonprofit what you did. Several of the kids did marketing campaigns on TikTok, reaching other young kids, telling them to tell their parents to support the nonprofit, who did. And those nonprofits are offering these kids jobs. It's like,
wow.
So career skills in the context of being a contributing citizen, getting good at something that matters, driven by students' curiosity without a textbook, without a structured curriculum. Boy, I tell you, so those to me, I think, are some of the real opportunities going forward, where the point of engagement can be after school, can be a club, can be Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, could be 4-H, could be a history class, who knows? And it just is, if we don't do right by our kids, I think it's a failure of imagination and courage on our part. And if we just keep pushing them through the same old obsolete stuff, where, by the way, there is no data, College Board doesn't have it. I can't find anybody that has it. There's no data that even our highest scoring kids retain what they're studying, let alone any data that they use it as an adult. I beg the College Board, re-administer AP chemistry exam 3 months later. How many kids actually could still get the same score? Would the drop-off be enormous? It would be enormous. They interview AP chemistry students 10 years later and say, how many of you use anything you studied? Very few. I'm not trying to pick on chemistry, but it's generally, when we know that, right? If you cram it into short-term memory for a test, never use it again, what was the point?
Yeah. Nick, I know there's got to be some questions piling up in the chat here.
Yeah, there's a couple of good ones, but Ted, being the awesome guest that he is also answering them implicitly with his comments. So it's great. But I want to highlight some of them because I see they're only coming to the hosts and panelists, just so people know what I'm referring to. So I think the first question that Ted, you referred to a few minutes ago was, how can we push the mindset training from today's into today's structured classrooms, noting that SAT exams just changed and more colleges are abandoning that structure. thank you, COVID, for kind of forcing that disruption. And then in addition, how can entrepreneurship instructors teach optimism in lieu of motivation or leadership in lieu of entrepreneurship? And as those are the kind of the key ingredients of startup success.
Yeah. And I'd love for people to read my book. This is a virtual forum. If we were all in person, I would have brought copies and given you all a copy of it. But, I profile a lot of examples. I'll pop out of K through 12 and go to the college level. I love this example, but bear with me. When I did my trip, I had the team that planned it all for me. And they when I was in Maryland, they said, we've got you set up for a full day. And when they said the name of where I was going to go, I could tell you exactly what I thought and how wrong it was for me to think of this way. They said, we're going to set you up. We've been able to arrange a full day visit to the US Naval Academy. So I said, absolutely. But in my mind, I'm thinking, this will be incredibly traditional. And I write about, and I say, this may be the most innovative education institution I visited in 200 schools across 10 and a half months. And it was, they just said two things, but I'm going to talk about the first, which will get at a key issue that I think really impedes innovation in our K through 12 schools. They did a careful look about a decade ago at their college admissions priorities. So how do you get into the Naval Academy? And they did look at SAT scores and AP courses and grade point average, and whether your parents were connected enough to a congressman or senator to get a great letter of recommendation. And the thing that's different about the Naval Academy versus most colleges is that they eat their own cooking, right? The products of the Naval Academy are the next generation of leadership in the US Navy. They don't go off to investment banks and management consulting firms or whatever. I mean, it is their ability.
Farm school.
Yeah, exactly. And so they said, we don't believe our admissions priorities are getting the right, applicants here. And they completely rethought it. And they prioritize, communicate to us examples of bold things you've taken on that have made your community better. Tell us what you did where we really want to understand that. And they looked at the other stuff and everything else, but that's what they care about. Then if you looked at what happened at the Naval Academy, there were all sorts of things, all the courses were far more project-based. There were all sorts of opportunities for, the middies to create their own initiatives to try to make the Naval Academy or the surrounding community better. Each person had their own leadership plan, which I thought was very interesting. So at the start of the Naval Academy experience, you would say not, here's how we're going to test you on a standardized test for leadership, but what is your personal plan? In what ways do you think you can lead others? And Gary's style might be very different from Ted's style, might be very different from Nick. We all would have different game plans, and then review it constantly to make sure you're really making headway aligned with what you believe are your strengths and talents. And if you're stalled, go back and rethink it. And I just was blown away by that experience. And I've spent way too much time and wasted money on the college admissions process. And somebody made the note that they're de-emphasizing long overdue the SATs. I think that's fine, healthy. I'm excited about it. If the default is to put more weight on AP test scores, we're really not changing the dynamic very much.
Right.
And I beg them, I give these talks, and I've been a big supporter of an alternative way to apply to colleges, which honestly has not been very effective, sorry to say. But I give these talks to admissions officers, and I say, you already know how to admit students based on visual evidence, clear evidence of a real proficiency you care about, where you look at everything else to make sure it's not going to be just a disaster situation. And that's called athletics. You are not accepting your football players based on their AP scores. You prioritize, can they convince you they're going to be a great football player for your team, or a fencer, or a synchronized swimmer, or whatever. And we'll look at the rest to make sure that it's not
You're not going to embarrass us. Yeah.
So I say, just say you can apply the normal way, but we have a different path. If you think that your best foot forward is to communicate to us examples of things you created to make your world better, we want to hear about it. and we still want to look at the other stuff to make sure there's not a real disconnect here, but we're going to really zero in on things you've invented or created that you're proud of. And it's like, that would change K through 12 overnight.
Overnight. Oh,
Yeah.
You know, it reminds me, Ted, I was working with the university in Colombia, in Cali, in Colombia, Pontificia Universidad Javeriana. And they took me to like a little hacker house, like off in the corner of the campus. You know, it's like a little, it used to be a house. It's a small little, 1,200 square foot house or something. And there's 25 or 30 kids in there, totally engrossed in their work. They're barely like looking up to say hello. And the lady who was sort of overseeing this explained to me that, when she arrives at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, the kids are already waiting on the front porch. And then she's got to shove them out the door at 8 o'clock at night. And I asked her, like, how can we flip that? Where all the students at Javeriana are waiting at the school door to unlock the door in the morning, and you got to shove them out. And there's a little house off in the corner for 25 kids that just aren't getting it. Like, how do we flip that?
How do we do? It's a funny anecdote about the film, because we ended up centering the story on the school in San Diego, High Tech High. And my film team, early in the process, sends me kind of a code red alarm text. And they said, we don't think this is a very good school to be filming at. We asked the students what one of their favorite things is about the school. And they all looked at us and said, well, we love our school because we don't have homework. And they said, really focusing on a school that doesn't have homework, that doesn't make any sense. And
so the filmmakers were also,
it won't be something that the average viewer can relate to. And I said, do me a favor, just stay with them all day. But if you can, go home with a couple of them at night and just see what happens. And I get the text like at 10 o'clock at night saying, I'm going to leave. They're at home. They're still working on something related to school. And I asked them, I said, wait a minute, like 9 hours ago, you told me you don't have homework. And they look at the camera and they say, well, this isn't homework. We want to do this. It's like that core thing that we want to do things we think are important, that we have some voice in. True for students, true for teachers, true for people in business and in nonprofits. We all want to do things we think are important that we have some voice in. And yet you can go 16 years in school, and when you ask somebody, and I do this a lot, what's an example of something you took on in your 16 years of school that you shaped and defined, that you're really proud of, that you can say, this was my creative differentiated work?
Yeah.
It is large. I mean, tragedy of all tragedies, right? Largely completely missing in action.
Yep. Well, you also sort of answered this other question here about, like, teach optimism in lieu of motivation. I mean, what you're talking about, Ted, if I understand you, is intrinsic motivation. Like the whole system is predicated on coercion and punishment and reward.
Yeah.
Which undermines the innate desire to learn. I mean, that's the, my thought experiment I like to use with educators is like college educators, you're the president of XYZ college. It's June of 2022. You're speaking to the graduating class of 24. Boys and girls, here's your diploma. You can go home. You don't have to come back. We're going to give you your diploma 2 years early. We think you should come back. There's some really interesting things here, but you don't have to if you don't want to. How many students are going to come back?
Yeah. I want to follow, because it's a great point you're raising about intrinsic motivation, because I will get sometimes challenged in the following way, which is, Ted, you say kids should take on bold initiatives and get comfortable trying things in the face of ambiguity and failing multiple times and having to get back up. Isn't this just going to help the well-off kids? And my answer is, actually, it's the opposite, right?
It's totally the opposite.
The well-off kids, and this is a overgeneralizing, but anyway, but the well-off kids are largely, to a shocking extent, micromanaged by parents who strategically use bribes and detentions to get kids to, and are telling them from practically birth that if you don't get into the right college, you really don't have much of a life. And if you can get better grades, we'll get you a new iPhone. And if you can get over 1,500 on your SATs, we'll get you a BMW. And on and on. And when you ask those kids and those families, when you say, here's something really ambiguous. Yeah, I can't really say what we're at, do something to make your community better. The response is invariably like, yeah, but what do we need to do to get an A? You're like, and it's always we. The pronoun is always we. It's never, and when you challenge kids in tougher circumstances, and I grew up in pretty tough circumstances, and give them a chance to do something they think is important. I mean, over and over again, I think it's offensive and inappropriate, but over and over again, the adults around them will say, oh, we never knew they had it in them. And my response is, of course they have it in them. We just don't let it out, right? Yeah. And when you look at who's doing the most worksheets in America today, it is not the rich kids. It's the kids trying desperately to escape poverty because they don't test as well. So what do? Brilliantly, we say, oh, here's our answer, more worksheets. It's a classic thing. What's the best advice to somebody in a hole? Stop digging, right?
Right.
But our national policies, and they've been really catastrophically awful, and I'm not a fan of any of our past secretaries of education, honestly. But our answer is, no, dig faster and harder. Somehow we're going to go from the surface of the earth all the way through to through the core of the earth and out the other side. And who knows what countries diametrically opposite us. And that's how we'll pop up for air.
But that goes back to my comment earlier about mindset, Ted, that read Jared Diamond's book, Collapse. Like the values to which we cling like most stubbornly under inappropriate conditions are those values that were once the source of our greatest triumph.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we tend to double down on prior beliefs rather than stepping back and looking at the system itself. Right.
Now, one thing, that I think is worth stressing here, and I often compare education choices we make, and I've been talking about from time to time, U.S. Secretary of Education, they're probably blah, 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 blah. But I contrast that with climate change, right? I suspect everybody on this call is somewhere between concerned to very concerned about the long-term health of the planet and climate change, all acting responsibly, trying to do something in this context, right? That if you and I do something, but most of the rest of the world doesn't, we're screwed anyway, right? So somehow this is a collective action is urgently needed. Will that happen? Smart bet might be it won't. But anyway, when it comes to education, these decisions are very local. Any family can say, I'm not buying that. Any classroom teacher can say, I'm not buying that. Any school, and actually in some ways, and this is sort of an entrepreneurial way of looking at the world, is that if, we used to, when I was in venture, we hated something that everybody agreed on. Right. We loved it when somebody did something really different. Our best deal, this was interesting, right? Is that when we look back, and my firm started in 1970, so we have a lot of history. We did this exercise where we looked at our best performing investments, and we were backing 1, 2, 3 people startups. And we tried to reconstruct, was there general consensus in the partnership? Oh yeah, we should absolutely invest in this. Or was there a lot of dissent? Thinking that the consensus would do really well and the dissent would be worse. The exact opposite.
Wow.
The ones that did the best almost always had somebody in the partnership saying, I would be embarrassed if we put our name on that investment. The best ideas cut right against convention. They challenge the existing thinking. And I think that's the opportunity for any of us, right? Is to say, for whichever kids we can influence, to open up their eyes and say, you can jump through these mindless hoops, get good at skills that are increasingly irrelevant, be miserable, pile up tons of student loan debt to go to a more selective, expensive out of state, on, and probably be in for a world of hurt as an adult. Or we could say, let's spend a lot more of our time getting good at creating bold things you care about, go deep on it and gain that confidence that I can affect positive change in my world with my own skills, my ability to learn, and effective leverage of online resources and the people around me.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah,
and you don't have to wait for the rest. You don't have to hope that China and India fall in fact, we got to be worried that China, believe it or not, by far and away, the country that's seen most likely to succeed the most, China. I've worked like crazy to get people in the US to see it. We've done 10,000 school community screenings, but for a while in China, until I shut down the pirating of it, they were doing online events getting 10 to 25,000 people at a time watching that film. They're serious. Will they be able to do it? I don't know. They are very serious about aligning education priorities with more entrepreneurial mindsets, and think they can clean our clock economically by doing that.
And they will. They will. I mean, we're going to get beaten at our own game. And I know we're coming at the end of the hour. I hope you can keep rolling here, Ted. I feel like I could talk to you all day. Nick, there's questions piling up in the chat. If people got to sign off, I know we advertise this as 1 hour. I understand with the recording, we'll post the recording and send it out.
Yep, absolutely. I think a good closing remark, because there's a lot of kind of internal dialogue between folks, has to do kind of going back to Ted, your story of the kids in Fargo. That this is basically asset-based development for the good of the community. But where Judy takes her comment later is, it's then a carryover of all of these disparate skills aligning together to make something really cool that benefits the community. It's then a carryover to the entrepreneurial mindset that actually helps them make a living. So I wanted to maybe talk about, teasing into that, the personal benefit of entrepreneurship as well. We've talked a lot about how it breeds innovation and it improves society as a whole, but what about what it's actually doing for the individual student?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's the power of an entrepreneurial mindset is that you believe you have control over your own destiny, right? And I think when we rank and sort kids, when we have them study stuff they're generally not in, when we have a kind of a batch processing model, it's easy for kids coming out of that to feel like it's happening to me instead of I can make it happen. And I think, and are there issues across society, differentiated issues? I mean, there are a lot of challenges. So I'm not trying to gloss over that, but I do think that deep in every person is a passion to move forward in life, to make things better. And the thing that I think is really interesting, right, is if, would I love to change college admissions? Yes. Will I? I've pretty much given up. Will colleges suddenly start taking, more of the poor kids in America? No. They're going to continue to be bastions of affluence. Would I love to change the hiring priorities of Goldman Sachs and McKinsey? Yes. Well, I know, on and on. There are a lot of things out there that are existing that are going to be a lot of work and effort and probably frustrating. When you create your own opportunity, it's like the digital economy doesn't give a darn where you come from. I'll try to be brief because I know we're over time limit, but I've given these talks to lots of educators, and I've particularly, I'll tell you, particularly community college presidents, and I'll ask them, how many of you are familiar with Upwork? None. I say to community colleges, Upwork ought to define your college catalog. Like Upwork is this digital marketplace where people who are in need of services and skills post what they need and people respond. And what's so liberating and empowering about Upwork is you don't look at their SATs or their grade point average. You have no idea where they went to college. You have no idea what their neighborhood is or their ethnicity. You don't see any of that, right? You see examples of their work in customer testimonials. And it's, I think, the most direct path to leveling the playing field. If we could start equipping kids through K through 12 with skills that matter, giving them a sense that they do have some control over their future, that they can create great paths, let them plug into a world that looks past the normal signals to quality of work.
Yeah.
I think that if we're going to disrupt things, that's going to be the way we do it.
I found some research that basically said that our sense of agency is more important than our actual agency. And that's what you're talking about. It's the belief that I can set and achieve my desired goals for myself. But I think the element that often gets missed, Ted, is that when the goals we set for ourselves are such that we're creating value for others, like that's how we tap into the motivation. That's how we tap into that superpower. And in my observation of entrepreneurs, I see it as biomimicry. Like, how do organisms orient themselves to unfamiliar environments?
Yeah.
They do it through micro experimentation and adaptation. It's an error-based learning, which is, to your point, the exact opposite of what we're teaching.
Yeah. And so, it is maybe a good point to sort of emphasize, and I'll stay as long as you want, but if we want to end on it, it would be this, is that what will be valued in the future by the adult world? It will be individuals who can create, invent, persevere through, and accomplish something they're proud of that makes a positive difference to the world around them. People we hire, people we want as neighbors, family members we're proud of. And I think it just begs, in 72-point bold font, it begs the question of why that isn't an important component of school.
Well, that's Ted. This is what I'm asking. Tony and I had this talk when he was on this series last year. When you forget the developmental benefits of entrepreneurship, but when you just look at the economic, it's not controversial. Like the value and impact of entrepreneurship in community and society is profound.
Yeah.
And you have to ask yourself, why is this not baked into the curriculum from grade 1? When you look at the importance of entrepreneurial activity in society,
yeah,
it's a head scratcher. It's just
it is. But as I said, it's not anything. We don't have to wait for the state secretary of education to say,
right.
I now bless this, and we don't have to wait for whoever the current miserably incompetent secretary of education is, of which we've got a long list.
Right.
We can do it. Like you can do it at home. You can do it in a class.
In spite of.
Yeah, in spite of. And when people often think, God, there's going to be an enormous downside. We didn't cover every last smidgen of content, which, by the way, no evidence they actually retain or use later in life. But a kid whose mind is racing, I think you used the example before in Columbia, of kids who just can't wait to be in school. Your mind's racing. You do just fine on these bullshit tests that we put so much weight on. And college admissions officers, they're often looking for authentic kids. I mean, that's another thing that I hear over and over again is, and as I say, these micromanaging parents always use the pronoun we. We did everything right. We took 12 AP courses. We took lots of SAT test prep. We got a 1570. And darn it all, we didn't get into any of our first choice colleges. And I'll ask them, well, did you apply to colleges that accepted both of you or just your kid? They'll say, what do you mean? I say, like, you're clearly a team here, right? I mean, you were just not applying to colleges that would take both of you because you guys are obviously joined at the hip.
Yeah.
And yet you talk to admissions officers, and I'm not a huge fan of them, but I think in some ways what we perceive they want, what they actually want are quite different. They know when a kid's been micromanaged. They can just tell a fake, application, and they'll often gravitate, not all of them, but find one in a college you care about who likes an authentic kid who says, yeah, this kid spoke to me. I'm with them. And so I think a lot of the perceived downsides are myths and not reality. And I always say, like, I had two very different kids. One, school came naturally to, it just did fine. And another one just kind of hated every minute of it. And if I had taken the kid who hated every minute of it and waged war to try to get him to have better academic performance, to get into a slightly better college, we wouldn't be on speaking terms, and he wouldn't have been happy, and his grade point average might have gone up by 0.1 or something. So I say to parents, like, how are you going to have a happy kid? Are you going to have a happy kid by figuring out what they want to do and supporting them, or by trying to bludgeon them into something that they don't want to do just to please some anonymous 28-year-old college admissions officer? Do you want to have a long-term healthy relationship with your kid? Do you want them to feel like you kind of screwed them over?
Well, I don't want you to get the wrong impression like I'm a Marxist or anything, but back to this Marxist, essay that I was reading about like worker alienation. And it occurred to me that he uses this term in German, like Gattungswesen, which is species essence. And the worker is alienated from his species essence. And I thought, students are not engaged. They're alienated from their species essence for the exact same reasons.
Yeah.
That we're just alienating them. That's what you were talking about. Like, we're just forcing them. I don't know if you've ever read Peter Gray's work, Free to Learn.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, it's a great book. And Derisiewicz, you read Derisiewicz, Excellent Sheep.
yeah.
It also speaks to the micromanaged kids, the children of the elite, and I think the subtitle is The Miseducation of the American Elite. That's really an interesting book. Nick, any final comments, questions? Ted, you got something you wanted to?
No, I mean, I think we've covered a lot of territory, and I love what you're doing and your perspective on this. You're an important voice in this. But I think maybe my final point is worth a minute on, which is people say, what got you interested in education? And I said, really, it wasn't an interest in education. It was an interest in functioning democracy. And if we have the wrong priorities year in and year out through school, and we have young adults graduating, leaving school without skills that are terribly relevant, thinking that life is all about jumping through meaningless hoops and out competing a classmate, kind of unhappy, alienated, over time, career adrift. How does that play out? And in a world where machine intelligence wipes out the routine jobs, if we keep feeding more into a world that doesn't value what we've essentially insisted they're good at, how does that play out? And that was 10 years ago. So when I would say 10 years ago, first to my wife, then to good friends, and then more broadly, I would say, if we don't change education priorities profoundly and urgently, I'm not convinced our democracy will hold together. People said, like, honestly, I mean, the basic word was retirement is not agreeing with Ted. I think he's lost it. That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
5 years ago, it was like, remind me what you said and why you said that. And today, nobody thinks that's a wacky statement. And and so the bar on this is very high.
Yeah. I love what you said. And I think similarly, Ted, that to me, the dog I have in this fight is about human potential. In my observation and analysis of these hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs, I've seen the extraordinary ability of ordinary people, and to quote Stephen Jay Gould, it's the mismeasure of man. It's the human flourishing that we're not getting to. That's the dog I have in the fight.
Yeah. So I'll put in one final plug. Please check out what schoolcouldbe.org. Everything I do is free. I cover the cost of everything. We have free coaches, all these great resources. Think of them as on-ramps to a better form of learning for your kid. If what we've been talking about resonates, these are those small steps that you can start taking. And we now have this platform so you can invite others to join in and share notes, what's working. And, because that's how movements really happen. I mean, they're not going to have, there's never been a successful movement where some high-level bureaucrat says, this is what you've got to do. It comes from us, right? And that's our opportunity.
That's great. And Nick has put the link to that, to all of your work in the chat here.
Which I will include in the follow-up email, just so we don't lose this great conversation going on in the chat as well. So just wanted to plug that in as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ted. This has been really illuminating. Yeah,
it's really been a great talk. We'll hope to get you back in a couple of years and see what you're up to. Thanks so much for doing this, Ted.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks to everybody for participating. It's really inspiring.
Yeah. And thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate your time today. We'll follow up with the links and the chat and the video shortly. So thank you. Hope you have a great afternoon.
Take care.
Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.